Well, good morning once again, and welcome to Woodland Street United Methodist. I'm Pastor Nick, and as always, I'm thrilled that you could be with us this morning. I don't know if you're joining us on Zoom or YouTube, or you found some other way to meet with us on our website, Facebook. I don't know. However you made it here, we're glad that you are. I know that you've got a busy Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever day you're watching this. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you, so we're just going to jump right in and start with our text this morning. Our first text comes from Nehemiah chapter 8, starting in verse 9. Then Nehemiah, the governor, Ezra, the priest and teacher of the law, and the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them all, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." For all the people had been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. Nehemiah said, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Our second text comes from the book of Psalms. It's Psalm 100. A psalm for giving grateful praise. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We're beginning today the same way we've begun every day for past several Sundays with the TLDR. For this sermon, it's that joy is that feeling we get when we sense that God is acting in the world. And as Christians, we're called to seek that joy out. Joy is different than happiness. It's different than pleasure. The happiness is just something we feel in response to that joy. Joy is the feeling of God acting in the world. Some people may be happy at that. Some people may be sad. Some people are likely terrified. But whatever we feel in response to that initial joy. To kind of get at what I'm talking about, I want to read an excerpt from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. They say Aslan is on the move. Perhaps he is already landed. And now, a very curious thing happened. None of the children knew who Aslan was any more than you do. But the moment the beaver had spoken these words, everyone felt quite different. Perhaps it has sometimes happened to you in a dream that someone says something which you don't understand, but in the dream it feels as if it had some enormous meaning, either a terrifying one which turns the whole dream into a nightmare, or else a lovely meaning, too lovely to put into words, which makes the dream so beautiful that you remember it all your life and are always wishing you could get into that dream again. It was like that now. At the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump inside. Edmund felt a sensation of mysterious horror. Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by, and Lucy got the feeling you have when you wake up in the morning and realize that it is the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. The children feel joy. They feel joy because they've heard that Aslan is on the move, but they each react to that joy differently. Joy is a precious thing and a rare commodity these days. That's one of the reasons I wanted a sermon about it. I've had so much difficulty finding joy recently. We've got this pandemic raging. We've got political and racial unrest. It seems like there's just no justice left in the world, and there's even less mercy, and it is hard to feel joy. It's hard to feel like God is active in the world amidst all this pain, all this suffering. So I wanted to have a sermon where we just looked at joy and talked about how we seek it out. One of the ways we seek it out is the way that we've done so every morning in our in-person service, which is by sharing in our joys and in our concerns. When we share in our joys, we look back on our week and we think through the ways that God has blessed us. We look for God's movement in the world. But another way that we do this, another way that we look for joy, is by looking at stories of times that God has been active in the world. And thanks be to God, we have an anthology full of those stories. So today we're going to spend some time looking through some stories in the Bible of times when people experience joy in different ways. And so you know that if we're looking at ways that people have experienced joy, we're going to be looking at Genesis. If you've been with us for a while, you're probably not that surprised. I go to Genesis chapter 1 a lot. It's a part of the foundation of our faith, but I think the reason that I go back there so much is because there is so much misinformation around Genesis. A lot of times people look at it and they see it as the time that God created, as the creation story. It's a story of the time that God created, but it's so much more than that, because God didn't just create and then say, all right, now you're all created. God continues to create. Genesis is just chapter 1 of the creation story, and we are all continually a part of it. Genesis is important because it tells us how our God creates. It shows us that our God is not a micromanager. Our God is not a sculptor. Right? Sculptors are creators, but not in the way that our God is. Sculptors, they have every detail of that marble planned out, and whenever they go to execute it, they carve every detail of that marble into the marble itself. Nothing happens to the marble without the sculptor acting. If the sculptor gives up and walks away, nothing else is happening to that marble. But our God isn't a sculptor, our God is a gardener. Most of the magic of gardening happens when the gardener is not around. Now, he has a vision for how the garden is going to turn out, but he's not going to wrangle. He's not going to wrestle the garden into that shape. Our God leaves room for the garden to act. God didn't wrestle light into being. God didn't cut light into being. God said, hey, let there be light, and then stepped back and made room for the light. God didn't reach down into the depths of the sea and wrestle life into being. God said, let the waters bring forth life, and then stepped back and let the waters bring forth life. Our God is a gardener. He doesn't create by cutting, maybe by pruning here and there, but by shaping, by cultivating. God creates like gardeners create. Yeah, there's watering involved, there is feeding the soil, there's moving the plants to a place of better light, maybe some repotting, but most of the magic happens when the gardener isn't even in the garden. The plants feel joy in the garden when they hear the gardener's footsteps, but they can feel the gardener's touch even when he isn't actively involved. God is a gardener, not a micromanager. But because God offers that space for the garden to shape itself, that leads to some problems. No matter how good of a gardener you are, the garden can get away from you. My wife, Hannah, knows this firsthand. She has a garden going along the side of our house, and we have these zucchini plants growing along it, and they keep on rotting. No matter what she does, she's tried feeding them, changing the amount of light, watering them too much, watering them too little, watering them just the right amount. Nothing seems to work. The zucchini keep on rotting. Because it doesn't matter how good of a gardener you are, sometimes your plants rot. I don't know if there's a better tagline for all of human history than the zucchini keep on rotting, but that's what kept on happening. No matter what the gardener did, the zucchini kept on rotting. And so finally God got this idea. Okay, so the zucchini are rotting. What if I focus on one plant, one zucchini? If I can get this one zucchini working, maybe I can use that plant to fix the others. So God called Abraham and said, Abraham, you're my zucchini, all right? I want you to come out here. I want you to look at the stars of the sky. You see those stars? Your descendants are going to outnumber the stars in the sky. I'm going to bless y'all. Y'all are going to hear my voice and follow my commands, and through you, I'm going to fix the rest of the world. I'm going to bless y'all. Y'all are going to bless everyone. And Abraham listened to this audible voice of God and felt joy. He felt joy. He was a plant in the garden hearing the voice of the gardener. So how do we feel joy then? We're not hearing an audible voice calling us out from our tent at 2 o'clock in the morning to go stargazing. So how do we feel joy? Part of how we feel joy is by looking back at those moments shared between Abraham and God, those moments when God was very obviously at work in the world. That's how the people of God did it when they were slaves in Egypt. And I'm talking about pre-Moses here. The people were slaves in Egypt. Every day was harder than the one that came before it. They were miserable, but they remembered the promises of Abraham. God wasn't speaking directly to any of them. Their lives were difficult, but they remembered the promises of God. They remembered the voice of the gardener. It was distant but distinct. And so no matter how hard Pharaoh tried to crush them down, it didn't work. They remembered the voice of the gardener, and they felt that joy vicariously through Abraham. And they looked around and saw that the promise God made to Abraham was being fulfilled among them. No matter what Pharaoh did to try and stomp them down, the people of God were growing into a nation. There was nothing Pharaoh could do to stop it. I love that. I love looking back and remembering the joy of other people so that I can feel joy myself. Listening for the voice of the gardener in the stories of the Bible. I think that's one of the things that we need to do today. For me, one of the stories that are my go-to for this is the story of the Battle of Jericho. Typically, I don't go in for Joshua, but this is one story that really gets to me. Because I like to imagine specifically the joy of the bugler, the priest, playing the ram's horn at the Battle of Jericho. So the people of God have come to Jericho, right? If you're not familiar with the story. And they have to get through Jericho to get to the promised land. God has promised them that things are going to be great. They just got to get through Jericho. But they approach the city and they see this massive wall. It is tall. It is thick. It is made of the strongest stone. There's no way they're going to get through, right? So Joshua says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to march around it once a day for 7 days. So they do. So you're a priest, right? You're carrying the Ark of the Covenant in your right hand. You got your ram's horn in your left, and you're seeing this wall from every single angle. Every single day, you are memorizing the surface of this impenetrable wall. You don't see a crack. You don't see a crevice. You don't see a single way that your people can go in and conquer this wall. But you're listening to orders. You're trusting in God. So you go around the city 6 times. And then on the 7th day, you go all the way around, and Joshua says, all right, here's the time. Priest, you're going to play your ram's horn, and you do. You put it to your lips and you blow. You play your note out long and clean, and you watch as brick and mortar collapses like a waterfall before you. And you feel joy. Immense, unquestioned joy at seeing your God at work in the world. I love revisiting stories like that. Living vicariously through the joy of somebody else. But then sometimes vicarious joy just isn't enough. Sometimes you really do have to seek joy out where you are at. Sometimes, no matter how depressing it is, you have to look around and find some proof of God's place in the world, that God is active in the world. That's the way Isaiah felt. Isaiah started his ministry in the year that King Uzziah died. Now, Uzziah was a king's king. He was stately, he was regal, he was perfect as far as the people were concerned. The people liked him so much, Uzziah contracted leprosy during his reign, and the people said, could you still be king though? Can you still be king with leprosy? We're fine with it if you are. So he stayed king. Uzziah was the picture-perfect king. They saw him, he was stately, regal. They looked at him and they felt confident that everything was going to be okay. They felt calm, collected. They were unified as a nation. And then he died. And there was this empty throne looming large over everyone's emotions. No one more so than Isaiah. Isaiah looked at this empty throne and felt this gaping emptiness, this question about whether or not God was really active in the world if the representative of God, the king, was dead. And then he looked deeper. He sought that joy out where he was. He looked at this empty throne and he saw a vision. Isaiah writes in Isaiah chapter 6 that in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on the throne, high and exalted, and the hem of his robe, just the hem of his robe, filled the temple. Isaiah saw in the year that King Uzziah died, in the year of the empty throne, Isaiah saw that the throne wasn't empty at all, that it was filled by the Lord, that God was always and would always be the King of the people of God. He reached for that joy with both hands and he grabbed it. In the spirit of Isaiah, I decided to seek joy in my own life. Not just to reflect back, though that's important, but to seek joy out presently. And so this week was Hannah's fall break, and we went down to Chattanooga. We went on some hikes, we visited some family, but on this one hike in particular, it was a 4-mile hike. And we went out and wound up at this precipice. We were looking out at these two forested hills converging in a valley, and the Tennessee River flowed through that valley. And I breathed in, and I took a bite of the apple that we had brought as a snack, and I listened closely for the footsteps of the gardener, and I realized, as a lot of you probably have, just standing surrounded by nature, that everything around me was so delicate seeming, so fragile. There's this intricate, delicate food web extending all around me, a fragile ecosystem that somehow has existed for thousands of years before me and would continue on for thousands of years after me. And I realized that the gardener is still at work. Gardener is still tending. I'm frustrated by politics and injustice and pandemics, but the gardener is still at work. If we listen closely, we can still find that joy. When we got back to the Airbnb, I pulled out my book of literature from the Romantic period, and I looked for a specific poem by Percy Shelley. The poem was Mont Blanc. It was when Percy Shelley went and saw this massive mountain for the first time, and it was huge, and it had been there long before him and would continue long after him, and it's a poem about him looking at this mountain and feeling insignificant. And I want to read to you guys what I found there. I wanted to read a lot more of it, but I talked it over with Hannah, and she said, please just do one stanza. So here we go. This is the first stanza of Mont Blanc. The everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves, now dark, now glittering, now reflecting doom, now lending splendor, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings of waters. With a sound but half its own, such as a feeble brook will oft assume in the wild woods, among the mountains lone, where waterfalls around it leap forever, where woods and winds contend and a vast river over its rocks ceaselessly bursts and raves. I read that, and I resembled it. I felt that same sense of awe-struck. This is why joy is more than simply happy or pleasurable. Joy is just a reaction to God being on the move, to feeling that God is on the move. Sometimes it's a happy feeling, sometimes you feel awesome, sometimes you feel dreadful, but it's just the feeling that God is on the move, and it's important that we seek it out, because joy is just a clue. Joy is just a signpost pointing to the future shape of the garden. And it is a beautiful thing to feel. It's doubly important in times like these when it's hard to imagine a world where God would still be working. This week, the call to action is just to seek out that joy, whether it's through stories or poetry or scripture, or just by taking a moment to stop and look around you and listen. Listen closely for the footsteps of the gardener. I hope that you have a chance to do that this week. And in that spirit, I invite you to go from here and go in God's peace. Amen.